some things that are special about Fressen?
Well, for me, the specialty lies in that we try really to specialize in the old world craft of the baking. And then the cafe is kind of an extension of that. You know, with that said, we can bring in a lot of other dishes, traditional dishes that I grew up with. That's kind of dear to me that I want to highlight. They're not necessarily typical German dishes, as we might know, because my heritage is very mixed. So it all comes together in as more of a conglomerate of a lot of influences, how I grew up, with what dishes I grew up, things like that. But the main, or the specialty that it's really about the breads, about sourdough breads, whole grain breads, pretzels, things like that. And pastries, of course. So where I grew up is, I grew up in a city, but I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' place, and that for me is kind of, I think, what shaped me the most. Their area lies within, there's a lot of influences from former Yugoslavia. They were right next to the border, so there's a lot of Serbian influences, Romanian influences, there's a lot of Turkish, Yiddish, and German, especially Austrian and Hungarian. So it's kind of like a melting pot of a lot of nationalities there, and of course, because they've been living together for hundreds of years, eventually the cooking, the baking, all kind of blends together, takes on similarities or traits from the other nationality.
And your family is German.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. They moved to that part of Romania when it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire I believe it was around 1700s. There were three big migration movements in the 1700s, and I can't remember on which year exactly, but one of those they were part of settlers.
You've also lived in southern Germany, is that right?
Yeah. So when I was able to moved to Germany when the wall came down, because when I grew up it was communist Romania, so we weren't allowed to leave. So when the wall came down in '89, that's when I moved to Germany, and my relatives kind of all stayed in the southern Germany, Bavaria and Swabia, so that's kind of where we also ended up in close to Munich.
I remember recently you had a celebration here for the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yes.
So you do have some involvement in the community in that way, putting on special events here.
Yeah, we're trying to kind of work a little bit more with that heritage. So it's not just about the food, but it's also about the culture. That's why we do Oktoberfest, and hopefully we can work more with bringing some other events in as well, cultural events, or maybe not necessarily cultural, but maybe more like Mardi Gras, German Mardi Gras, things like that. So as we grow, eventually we'll kind of bring that more in. But right now we're trying to work more with the German society, because they already have that framework in place. When they do their Mardi Gras, we kind of work with them together, establishing their the food preferences or whatever they want to serve, things like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, how did you get started in this business?
Well, first of all, I came here and I wanted a brand new start. I really wanted to do something completely different, but after, it took a while. So when I moved here, I moved to San Francisco first, and then of course I had to wait about a year to get my visa applications through and everything, and in that time there was not a lot of work you can do because you're not allowed to work. But I kind of like, since I trained bakery in Germany, I kind of like, there was no better time to spend maybe just to look around other bakeries in the San Francisco area, and just kind of like just go in and help out in a way that, you know, just kind of keeps me again not just interested in what people do here, but also kind of like keeps me in the game again. So been working with some bakeries in San Francisco, mostly up north in Mendocino County, that I especially loved what they do. They were kind of going back then already to kind of the old world craft, you know, just kind of like handmade things, sourdough, and into the whole grain. And eventually I ended up with working at a San Francisco Baking Institute as well a little bit. And then my son was born, and we just needed to get into a little bit of a bigger city. So that's how we ended up in Portland, because I lived on the coast in Mendocino County, Point Arena. There was not a lot going on there. I mean, there were some restaurants, cafes, but not that much. In terms of opening your own place, which I was contemplating at that point, that wasn't the right place to. But Portland was very attractive to me because it had a very sizable German population, and especially a very sizable population with ancestry from Germany. And of course, then there's a lot of German companies here that, you know, bring their workers here. So you have a revolving door of people coming from Germany, leaving, new people coming. Yeah.
What made you decide to open a business here in Montavilla?
Well, so previously we were down at Kearns neighborhood, and that was a convenience because that's also where I'm still living. So it was convenient for me because my son was going to school. It's kind of easy to just kind of keep things closer to home. Montavilla was for me interesting because when I had moved to Portland, I kind of lived around this neighborhood first, and I always loved it. It's kind of a older neighborhood. It has the charm of a neighborhood. I think that it's kind of missing a little bit now. People live there for a long time, so you really have people that are integrated in a community, and I guess that's more going back to my roots too, where I kind of like that. It's like the village where I grew up in mostly. It's people have been there forever, and it's the stories, and you know, it's just kind of like it's more of a community feel, and it's not people that just move there, they move away in a few years, where it's harder to maintain relationships, you know, because at some point, if you're in a location, you do create relationships with your customers, even though they're just customers, but it's becoming a little bit. It's becoming something else.
Did your mother bake bread?
She didn't. Bread baking was more something that my grandmother would do, or we had somebody else that would. Let me go back. So either we would do our breads in the village and then bring them to the village baker to fire them up, and then we had a loaf, or you had like a delivery a week coming from a different bakery, from a different village, you know, and they would cart it in by horse and buggy, and just large loaves. They were like usually about 8-pound loaves that would last you for a week or so. So bread baking was more like, I think, something that I later got into it, just because the memories were so I was very fond of those, and kind of got a little bit of an idea how my parents would do my grandparents would do the bread baking just by watching them. And then as I grew up, kind of like I just realized the breads are never the same, and tried to look into it why, and then I just realized there's different methods they were using just because they had to make do with limited resources. And you know, you never throw bread away, you reuse it. And it's kind of like, that's where I kind of realized this is a whole nother part that I would like to know more.
We were talking about reusing bread. You were talking about getting deliveries of 8-pound loaves into your village, and how none of that was going to go to waste, right?
Yeah, so usually the first days or so you just eat your bread, and then, you know, as it gets staler, you kind of either toast it, or what happened a lot, you just crumble it into your milk and eat it like that, and it's fantastic. It's kind of like the version of what French do with their croissants. You dip the croissant in coffee. So we would use old bread in coffee, you know, and it's kind of in between a meal and almost a dessert, you know. And then if it gets staler, you just kind of make dumplings with it, or you start, when it's kind of the point when it's even too hard for that, then we would kind of reuse it in the way, as I mentioned, like you can soak the bread overnight till it's moist, and then you add it to the next batch of bread. So it kind of replaces part of the flour, but it adds a lot of moisture to the new loaf. There's so much sugar still left in the in the leftover bread that's beneficial for the yeast in the new in the batch to feed on. It brings out a lot of flavors that you can't just by a regular loaf. So it's kind of like never anything is usable. It's just a way looking at things how you can do it.
Right. That's very inspiring.
It's also long work.
Can you say a little bit about the name of the business, Fressen?
Yes, and for me that's been kind of a more playful approach to the business. It has to do with maybe the approach to food in general, and German bakeries usually have the name of their owner in the business name, and for me, I kind of, because I felt more like my history is maybe a little bit more important to me, or my approach to food is more important. I kind of come up with that name because it's it is mentioned in a play, the Three-Penny Opera. One of my favorite dramaturgs, Bertolt Brecht, brings it up. He says, first comes Fressen, then the morals. Basically, first comes food, and afterwards come the morals. Without food, we're all going to turn into animals in our behavior, if you're hungry, I guess. So that was, I guess, my symbolizing maybe the love of, or the appreciation I have for the food.
Was it difficult to find a place in Montavilla?
Yes, it was, and because we were looking at specific things, so we were looking at enough space for the wholesale side, enough space for retail, but we wanted to have an outdoor place as well for a beer garden. So, we were limiting ourselves a little bit to what we are looking for, and but we were very fortunate because it was one of the, within a few weeks of looking, we actually found this place, and that was actually pretty much, I loved it right away. I think you could envision everything how it already could look like, and we're not quite there yet with what we want to build out here, where we want to go with it, but it's I think we're going to get there within hopefully the next year or so.
What advice would you give to somebody interested in maybe staking out on their own, doing something like you're doing?
Oh, I think it's possible, and everybody should do it. I think that try to be realistic about it, and I think the main thing, it always comes down to money. Have that part figured out before you start something, because the hardest thing is to jump into it and try to generate the income as you go, because it's you're always going to fall back a little bit. It's going to be kind of pushing the stone up the mountain pretty much. But I think I've met so many people that actually started the same way I did when I did. We using the same kitchens maybe, and I see a lot of people now, they have their own businesses too. It's a process, and I think you need a certain kind of naivete to start it. Don't let anybody talk you out of it, but have a little bit of sense of realism too, that it's painful, and a lot of maybe other goals have to take a back seat. But yeah, don't give up. It's a wonderful thing to do.
What about for the future? What's next? What do you want to do in the community or in business?
Yeah, so first of all, we just want to finish the projects that we were kind of have lined up. We want to work this year. We hopefully getting the beer garden finished outside, so we can have an outside seating area, especially for the summer months. That's more modeled to an authentic experience. Have traditional German beer furniture, beer garden furniture, and with that said, the next thing would be just to kind of work on more like a program of offering classes here as well. That was a big dream of mine when I started, and I had it going for a few years, but then as things got more busier, you don't have that extra day anymore where you can offer classes. So it kind of got lost a little bit. And so we want to bring that back where we can offer classes in the back for pastry, bread, small classes. Doesn't have to be anything long, but maybe 2-3 hour classes. Eventually would be my ultimate dream would be, of course, on the outside to have just model something that how I grew up with. Maybe have a small brick oven out there where we can actually then do things like be kind of a village baker or neighborhood baker where people can bring their own loaves. If they make their bread at home, bring them here so we can bake them off together. It's brings community together, have a few beers while you wait for or non-alcoholic drinks, whatever, coffee. Wait till the beer is, I'm sorry, till the bread is baked so you have time to catch up with. It's socializing a little bit and do something, something together that's, it bonds, Yeah, things like that.
What do people generally ask about the business?
I think most people are really interested in the pictures, just kind of asking pictures if they're just generic pictures or if they're relatives of mine, and that opens a lot of conversation. We had a lot of people that their parents came from, maybe not necessarily from their region, but from they were Russian Germans or things like that. So they kind of remember, oh yeah, my great grandparents also had migrated, and I'm here. I remember certain things. Do you guys do that? Do you remember maybe making that bread like this? Or so it opens up a lot of communication and interest too. Yeah.
Awesome. That's a good lead into the photograph.
It really is.
I'm just glad and appreciative that people love it to the extent that they do, and I feel like sometimes you feel like maybe you're doing the right thing at the right time in the right place. And that's always a great help to just kind of feel like, the work you do does have some meaning in some way. It's not just for my own good, because it makes me feel connected to the craft, to my background, but it's also, people are actually taking it on and they're appreciating.